Hi, everyone, and welcome along to the Ergonomically Speaking podcast, the podcast that aims to help you reduce and even eliminate work related discomfort. I'm your host, Neve Pentney of Boyne Ergonomics. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that you're able to take away some useful practical advice from this podcast to help you reduce your own risk of discomfort at the workplace or help manage the risks among the people that you might be responsible for. So now that we know why we're here, let's get started. Hello, and welcome along to episode 25 of the Ergonomically Speaking podcast, where today I'm going to be talking to you about what you can do to optimize your lighting at your home workstation and why this is important. We're coming into winter now, and this is the time of year where I start to get these queries. I start to get people asking me about what the best way to light the home workstation is. I start to speak to more people about symptoms of eye strain, headaches, eye fatigue. And this is a difficult time of year from that point of view because light levels, natural light levels especially, can vary so much depending on the weather in particular. We've got, generally speaking, lower light levels for a longer part of the day because it's starting to get darker earlier. The weather is not as good. It can be overcast and dull for more of the time, and this can impact light levels. And you may start to notice issues that you might not have noticed in spring and in summer when the light levels are generally better. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. When it comes to light levels and the DSE workstation, your computer workstation, especially now when we're hybrid working, with the office, you generally don't need to think about the light levels, and you probably never do because it's taken care of by somebody else and it's generally pretty consistent no matter what the time of day or what the time of year. There is legislation that covers light levels at a DSE workstation, and here in Ireland, that's the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work, the General Application Regulations 2007, Chapter 5 of Part 2, which relates to DSE or display screen equipment, computer workstations as we commonly call it. And the section there that covers the lighting for the DSE workstation, basically it means that in the office, what we want to look at is the lighting, which includes your room or the spotlighting and the lamps. They are supposed to ensure satisfactory lighting conditions and an appropriate level of contrast between the screen and the background environment that should take into account the type of work that's being done and your own visual requirements. That steps are taken to prevent possible disturbing glare and reflections on the screen or other equipment. And this is done by coordinating the layout of the workstations within the place of work and the positioning of equipment and the technical characteristics of the artificial light sources. It also states that suitable background lighting is required for DSE work to provide an appropriate contrast between the screen and the background and to avoid problems of glare and reflection. And as a general rule of thumb, the light level in the office should be between 3 and 500 lux. If more light is required, for example, because maybe you want to read some paper documents, then that's where we bring in additional task or local lighting. However, if we're looking at a table lamp, the light should not shine on the computer screen or the immediate surrounding area. And they also provide some general points to consider in relation to lighting. And that is that all lights should be provided with shades or glare shields, that the lux meter is the simple device that we use to measure light levels, and the use of reflected colors and materials on machines and tabletops, etc., should be avoided. As much as we can, surfaces, generally speaking, should be matte to avoid reflection and glare. These are the guidelines as set out in our regulations here in Ireland. And generally speaking, in most workplaces, in most offices, these are observed. And as I said, the office light level is not something we generally work about. There are issues sometimes with lighting being too bright or glares and reflections, but generally this is to do with positioning of the light and positioning of the workstation, positioning of the natural light and equipment. And these are generally adjusted, but the lighting itself in the office is usually okay. Obviously, now when you come to working from home, we're now coming into our third winter of home working or remote working or hybrid working. because of COVID. And as we've learned at this point, the light levels are not as consistent as the office because the light level at home generally is going to vary depending on your workstation position relative to your natural light source, your distance from your natural light source, so like your door, your window, the aspect of the room, so what way your room faces, because that's going to dictate when you get the sun and what levels of sun you get when it's out, the time of year, the time of day, and the cloud cover and the weather. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to the lighting at your home workstation. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that we get the best amount of natural light that we can for the room. And then that's where we bring in the additional lighting. When it comes to home computer workstation lighting, it's not just the level of lighting that's important. Of course, that in general is important because that will determine how much light we have in the room, but also we need to look at the distribution of the light and contrast and glare and reflection. So, poor light distribution is going to cause parts of your room to be kind of dark and gloomy. And you might not worry about that, especially if they're parts of the room that you're not working in. However, it will force your eyes to readjust as you move between each area of the room, as you're looking around the room. And this can also, you can have contrast between low light level areas, high light level areas, and this can increase the workload and the strain on the eyes. Glare, generally speaking, occurs when a bright light or reflection interferes with what you can see on the screen. If we look at glare from a DSE point of view, what's going to happen there? And the reason it's a problem is your eyes are going to adapt to the brightest light level on the screen, which is going to make it harder to read the duller areas of the screen. So the areas that are not impacted by the glare. And again, this is going to increase workload and strain on the eyes. The other area I see with glare, the other issue, sorry, that I see with glare and reflections is sometimes I will see people adjust their body position to read around the glare instead of adjusting the screen or the lighting to actually remove the glare or the reflection. And that can cause an issue with musculoskeletal strain, especially if this is something that has to be done quite a lot. And with contrast, as I mentioned, you get your contrast between your low light level areas in the room and the high light level areas, but also contrast between the colors of the objects in the work area and on the screen. What can we do to optimize light levels when you're working from home? So, optimizing light levels at home, it is important because we want to reduce the symptoms of digital eye strain because that can be impacted by your light levels. So, you want to reduce eye strain, eye fatigue. We want to reduce the risk of developing headaches and musculoskeletal disorders associated with poor light levels. When I talk to people about lighting at the home workstation, obviously everyone's home workstation setup is different, but I generally go with a four-layer approach to make sure that you have enough lighting and enough adjustable lighting for computer-based tasks, but also your paper-based tasks. Now, I know generally the level of paper-based work is not as high when you're working from home, but a lot of people still take notes and still work off notebooks and paper. So we want to make sure that we have enough light to do both the computer based and the paper based. So, your first source of light is your natural light. So, where possible, your workstation should be positioned at a right angle to the window or your light source. And that generally makes the most of the light with minimal glare and reflections, generally speaking. A lot of people position the workstation with the window behind the screen. Now, I wouldn't recommend this in an office, but actually at home, it tends to work quite well as long as there are blinds or curtains on the window in case we need to close them for glare coming into your eyes. But generally speaking, one of the reasons I tend to not discourage people from having the window behind the screen is one, it increases the light level behind the screen. And two, it provides a source of distraction. As I mentioned, if you listen back to the episode on digital eye strain, or if you read the blog post on that, you'll know that one of the biggest risk factors is spending too long looking at the screen. Well, generally having a window behind your screen, even if it's just a bird that flies by, There'll be enough of a distraction every now and then to pull your eyes off the screen and look out the window and give them a rest. So I don't tend to discourage this as long as there are blinds or curtains on the window. Your second source of light is your ceiling light, your overhead light. This, in most houses, will illuminate the room, but not to a high enough level for general kind of between the 3 and 500 lux, as I mentioned before. And I have been in plenty of home workstations where I've measured the light, and even with the light on, the ceiling light on, the light level is still below where we'd want it. With the ceiling light, make sure that you do not have your workstation directly underneath it because this will cause glare. All ceiling lights should have a shade, obviously, because this diffuses the light, spreads it out. One thing I have found great, and this is something I've done myself, and I would consider it if you were able to change this in your home workstation area. Adjustable LED ceiling lights are a really good way of replicating office light levels and the temperature of the light if you have the option to install it. This is a change we made, I'm going to say it's probably about over a year ago. And to be honest, since I've made the switch to an adjustable LED ceiling light, I no longer actually use my desk light at all because I don't have to. So we have an adjustable light here and I can change how bright it is and I can also change the temperature. So I can go from a really cool bright light to a warmer kind of yellow tone if I want. And I do that based on the time of day or what I'm going to do. And to be honest, since I've done that, I found I don't really use my desk lamp at all. But it's not possible for everyone at home. So I do understand that. The third light source is your additional indirect light. Basically, this is your floor lamp, your adjustable or your uplighting floor lamp. And what we want this to do is to light the general workstation area without beaming light down onto the desk. They're really useful, especially if you have a large room or if you are in the corner of the room away from your natural light source. It just helps to improve the light distribution in your work area. That being said, I would not use it alone. I would have your ceiling light on too, because again, we don't want to have poor light distribution where we have really dark areas of the room and really bright areas of the room. And then your final fourth source of light is your task lighting or your desk lamp. Now, ideally, this should be adjustable, both in the light levels and in the tones and in your position. That's just to allow you to get the benefit of the light without getting big beams of light down onto the desk and down onto your page or down onto your keyboard, because these are all sources of glare and reflection. You should put the light onto your non-dominant side. And the reason for this is if you put it, so for example, if you're right-handed and you put your lamp on your right-hand side, when you're using the mouse or when you're writing, you're going to cast shadows across your work surface. So if you are right-handed, I suggest putting it on the left and vice versa, because this will just reduce the impact of shadows. And the other thing that can be considered, and again, I've seen it a lot, is the use of LED strip lighting on a wall behind your screen to illuminate the general area. And ring lighting can also work really well as long as it's positioned slightly behind the monitor, that you're lighting the work area, but you're not putting glare or reflections onto the screen. Those are my general four sources of light. And by having them, you can adjust the light for any time of day, any type of weather, and any type of task. A lot of people ask me, should, in this type of weather, should they adjust the brightness of the screen or should they adjust the lighting at home? I would always say adjust the lighting. Now, you can get apps, and I do use them myself on my laptop, that will adjust brightness levels and temperature based on the day. Flux, for example, is one that I've recommended before. But if this is not going to take into account the actual specific light levels. So if you find that, for example, on a day in the winter where the weather's poor and it's overcast and it's 1 o'clock in the day and your room's looking a little bit dull, well, rather than dulling your screen so that you don't have too much of a contrast between the screen and the lighting in the room, I would increase the light level in the room to balance it out a little bit, because especially if you think about it this way, your monitor is not the only thing you look at when you're working. So by increasing the light level, you're reducing the contrast, you're keeping your screen brightness to a good level that you can read it. You're reducing the contrast between your brightness of your screen and your room, but also you're going to make sure you're able to read your notes. You're going to make sure that there's not too much contrast between your phone screen and the room. Because again, we use the phones a lot when we're in work. So, common question, I would always recommend adjusting the brightness levels of the room. And the reason we want to do that again, and the reason lighting is so important, is we want to reduce the risk of eye strain, fatigue, headaches, and it will help us to maintain focus on our tasks, which of course is really important when we're working from home. So that is the ideal or optimal lighting for a home DSE workstation. As always, you can get in touch with me. I'll put all my details in the show notes, my email, and all my social media details. There is a blog post for this, again, as always, on the website where I have images and graphics to explain this a little bit better. If you need those, you can go online and check them out. The next episode, we're going to be looking at what you can do to kind of reduce your symptoms if you are experiencing back or leg pain at the workstation. So that's what we're going to cover in the next topic. As always, get in touch if there's a topic you want me to cover, and I'll put it on the list and add it on. But the back one has been requested once or twice, so we'll go with that one for the next one. Quite common. And the episode after that, we're actually going to look at what you can do to reduce your risk of injury during the wonderful festive season. So those are the next two ones. Until next time, everybody stay well, and I will talk to you all again soon.